Hi, thanks for tuning in. My name is Ronald, and today I'm going to answer 8 questions surrounding the topic of gender identity. Now, over the past few years or so, there's been a lot of debate around this topic, and I'd like to share my perspective on it. In the video description, you'll find a table of contents with timestamps, so feel free to skip ahead to any specific question. And speaking of which, the questions are: 1. What is a woman? 2. What is the difference between sex and gender? 3. Can children identify as the opposite sex? 4. Can people be born in the wrong body? 5. Should there be gender-neutral bathrooms? 6. Should transgender individuals compete in sports against their biological counterparts? 7. Should people be housed in prisons based on their gender identity? And 8. Should we respect people's preferred pronouns? Okay, so let's start with the question, what is a woman? Or more precisely, what is a female, since young female children aren't considered women yet? So first off, generally speaking, females have double X chromosomes, while males have XY chromosomes. Now, what are chromosomes? Well, simply put, chromosomes are structures in our cells that carry genetic information inherited from both parents. We have 23 chromosomes from our father and 23 from our mother, for a total of 46. As said, these chromosomes contain genes which influence various biological traits, including the development of sex. Now, sexual development is largely guided by hormones, which are regulated by genes on these chromosomes. And the presence and levels of certain hormones like testosterone, a typical male hormone, and estrogen, a typical female hormone, influence whether a person develops male or female reproductive anatomy and therefore determining their biological sex. I'll talk about more differences later in this video. Now, I did say generally speaking because, as always, there are exceptions. You see, there are people born with intersex conditions, and this means, for example, that they may have XY chromosomes, but with female reproductive anatomy, or vice versa, they may have double X chromosomes, but with male reproductive anatomy. There are also those who are born with ambiguous genitalia, meaning that their reproductive anatomy is not clearly male or female. So in most cases, it's quite straightforward to define someone as either male or female. However, in some instances, it becomes more complex. So for example, if a person undoubtedly appears and sounds female, but has XY chromosomes, also has partially male reproductive anatomy and high testosterone levels, how do we define their sex? Is this person male or female? Now this leads me to the next question, what is the difference between sex and gender? So first off, sex refers to the biological characteristics including anatomy, male or female reproductive organs, chromosomes, and hormone levels. And these characteristics typically categorize individuals as male or female, although, as we have learned, there are exceptions such as intersex conditions. And gender, on the other hand, refers to the psychological identity. This means that we feel or identify ourselves as either male or female. However, there are people who have trouble identifying themselves strictly as either male or female, and they identify themselves as something else, such as non-binary. And for those who don't know, the term non-binary is derived from the concept of the binary system, which refers to two states, 1 or 0, which means on or off respectively. So basically, non-binary means not 1 or 0. Anyway, to explain gender further, I like to think of it as a psychological scale with the value of 50 at the center representing neutrality and with values moving to the left or right up to 100 on either side, so male on one end and female on the other. So, for example, someone might feel 95% male, so their place on the scale would be close to 95 on the male side. However, at the same time, I actually think it's impossible to determine this value with precision. In other words, we can't truly measure how much someone feels male or female. That said, I'm convinced that no one can likely feel exactly 100% male or 100% female, just as no one is likely exactly 100% straight, gay, or lesbian. So now that we understand the differences between sex and gender a bit more, let's move on to the next question. Can children identify as the opposite sex? Now, in recent years, there has been increasing attention in the news about children expressing a gender identity that is different from their assigned sex. And some parents and schools are supporting these children by allowing them to socially transition, which can include changes in name, pronouns, clothing, and access to facilities that align with their gender identity. But can children really identify as the opposite sex? How do we know if what children feel is authentically true? For instance, if a young boy wants to dress up as a girl, does this mean he genuinely feels more than 50% female? And I'm referring back to the scale mentioned earlier. How can we be sure that a child's expression of identity is not influenced by their environment or certain mental health factors? That being said, I am inclined to believe that it is possible for a child to genuinely and biologically prefer toys and activities, for example, typically associated with the other sex. And if that's the case, then that's simply who they are. However, it's very difficult to separate these preferences from potential environmental influences, whether from parents, family, school, or peers, or to separate them from potential mental health issues. Young people in general are highly susceptible to influences from those around them. We have to take that into account. What we also need to take into account is the possibility that there might be other factors involved that leads to an identity that is not truly their own. In an ideal, healthy situation, it's important that children, and especially during adolescence, need the freedom to explore and discover their identities on their own. Adolescence specifically is a time of significant self-discovery, and not just regarding gender, but across many aspects of who they are. And even after adolescence, many adults continue to search for and learn about themselves throughout their lives. Let's move on to the next question. Can people be born in the wrong body? Okay, so when a woman is attracted to other women, does that mean she should have been a man? Or when a man is attracted to other men, does that mean he should have been a woman? Or likewise, when a biological woman wants to be a man, does that mean she should have been born male? And when a biological man wants to be a woman, does that mean he should have been born female? In other words, are they truly born in the wrong bodies? Or are these preferences or experiences simply a reflection of the imperfect world we live in? Now, don't get me wrong, imperfections are something we all have. No one can escape that. We're all shaped by the imperfection of the world in one way or another. You see, in a perfect world, we would all be straight, since life depends on opposite attraction for reproduction. And in a perfect world, we would all be satisfied with our assigned sex, eliminating any confusion or conflict surrounding sex or gender. But in reality, does the world need each and every one of us to be straight and to be content with our assigned sex? No. So maybe it's not about being born in the wrong body, but being part of a different category, just as most people are straight, while others are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or asexual. This doesn't mean one category is better than another. It's simply the reality of the imperfect world we live in, which is full of all sorts of possibilities. Now, having said all that, I encourage you to listen to my response to the previous question if you haven't already, as it may also apply here. And to be specific, I'm referring to the potential influence of people around them or the presence of mental health issues. Also, I quickly want to touch on whether people should physically transition from male to female or vice versa. Some individuals feel they were born in the wrong body and want to change that through medical treatments. Now, personally, I believe people should strive to feel comfortable in their natural skin as much as possible. That said, this could be a topic for another video because it does raise the question, how much should we change about ourselves? For instance, when we do muscle training, our body changes. When we wear braces, that part of our body changes. So again, this might be something to explore further in a future video. Alright, the next question I'll be answering is, should there be gender-neutral bathrooms? So let's first talk about the benefits of having a gender-neutral bathroom. Well, one reason to want this is to simply have a single space for the sake of simplicity, ease, and practicality. I remember seeing this type of bathroom in a kindergarten many years ago, and I'm quite sure it wasn't meant to accommodate transgender or non-binary students, for example. Because that could be another reason to introduce such bathrooms in schools, even in kindergartens, and this is based on a true story. Those who feel they don't fit traditional gender norms will evade the burden of choosing the right bathroom. So having one space for all is very convenient for those who have trouble identifying themselves strictly as either male or female. And of course, this applies not only to schools, but also to public spaces. In fact, I've used a gender-neutral bathroom in a public space before, and for me, it was completely fine. And by the way, that bathroom wasn't fully enclosed. It had 2 doorless entrances on opposite sides. So while I personally had no issues using that gender-neutral bathroom, not everyone may feel the same way in every setting. And this brings us to the disadvantages of having gender-neutral bathrooms. The number one reason not to have such bathrooms or restrooms is because of safety and privacy concerns. Shared spaces could be vulnerable to misuse such as harassment or voyeurism. And some people, especially those who are accustomed to gender-segregated bathrooms, may feel uncomfortable sharing facilities with the opposite sex. So I think it depends on the location where you offer a gender-neutral bathroom and how it is designed. Above all, it must be a safe and private space because safety and privacy are the most important factors in this context. And if only gender-segregated bathrooms are available, then we have a smaller group of people who may feel uncomfortable choosing or using one or the other, since the majority of people identify themselves strictly as either male or female. This is a utilitarian approach, by the way, meaning you're focusing on what brings the greatest benefit to the most people. Though I'm not saying that this approach is always the best, but in this case, it might be. Another important question, though not one of the 8 listed, is, should transgender individuals be allowed to use women-only bathrooms? Now, I chose not to include it in the main list because the same reasoning applies here as with gender-neutral bathrooms. In other words, it may not always be welcomed due to safety and privacy concerns. And here I'm only referring to restrooms. I'm not even talking about shared dressing rooms or showers. But then again, transgender individuals who truly and genuinely identify as male or especially female and present themselves as such face a higher risk of harassment and discrimination when forced to use facilities that don't align with their gender identity. Sadly, the utilitarian approach will not satisfy everyone. In this case, it's because, as a Dutch saying goes, and this is a rough translation, the good ones have to suffer because of the bad ones. And the English equivalent is, the innocent must bear the consequences. This expression reflects the frustration when innocent or well-meaning individuals face repercussions due to the actions of others who behave badly. Alright, the next question is, should transgender individuals compete in sports against their biological counterparts? Now, this topic has sparked a lot of debate in recent years, especially when Iman Khalif, an Algerian boxer, won the Olympic gold medal in Paris last year. A lot of people felt it was unfair. Why? Well, because first of all, and this may sound rude, but to many people, Iman Khalif looks male. And secondly, and more importantly, because in 2023, Khalif was disqualified from another international competition after the International Boxing Association, IBA, reported that she, and yes, I say she, has XY chromosomes and high testosterone levels. However, it's important to note that Khalif was born female, has always been registered as female, and has lived her entire life identifying as female. Another thing to mention is that the IBA's test results regarding Khalif were never made public, which led to criticism over the lack of transparency. The International Olympic Committee (IOC) also criticized the IBA's gender testing methods as flawed and illegitimate. Now, I don't know where the truth lies, but this is the situation as it stands. It may well be, and I'm not saying it as facts, but it may well be that Khalif does indeed have XY chromosomes and high testosterone levels. And if so, we could be looking at an intersex condition, a topic I discussed earlier. But regardless of whether we're talking about transgender individuals or those with intersex conditions, there are valid concerns about physical advantages such as increased muscle mass, bone density, and cardiovascular capacity, which may create an uneven playing field. And I believe what we ultimately want is the opposite, an even playing field. Now, different sports organizations address this issue in various ways. For example, World Athletics and World Aquatics exclude transgender women who underwent male puberty from competing in elite women's events. But the NCAA, college athletics in the US, allows transgender women to compete under certain testosterone suppression requirements. These policies show how different organizations try to balance inclusivity and fairness in their own ways. And of course, there are plenty of other examples out there. Another hot topic in recent times revolves around the following question. Should people be housed in prisons based on their gender identity? Now, there have been reports of men identifying as women who were allowed to transfer to women's prisons, even in cases where they were convicted of crimes such as rape. And unfortunately, some incidents of sexual assault in these facilities were reported afterwards. It's mind-boggling that authorities would allow a man convicted of rape to be housed in a women's prison simply because he claims to identify as a woman. I really don't understand the logic behind such decisions. But what about those who truly and genuinely identify as the opposite sex? Should they be housed in prisons based on their gender identity? It's a tough question. On one hand, we may want to acknowledge and respect their identity, but on the other hand, this could lead to problems. At the same time, placing transgender individuals in prisons that don't align with their gender identity could also lead to problems such as increased risks of harassment, assault, and violence. A potential solution might be conducting a thorough assessment of each individual's needs, risks, and circumstances to determine the best placement. And this could include separate housing units specifically designed for transgender or similar individuals. Okay, the last question I'll be answering is, should we respect people's preferred pronouns? So, for example, if a person who appears male asks us to call them she or her, should we respect that? Well, I'd say, why not? If this person identifies as female and wants to be seen as one, that's their choice, and we can acknowledge it. But what if someone wants you to call them by the pronouns they or them? They don't identify strictly as male or female, for whatever the reason may be. Should we respect that, calling one person by a plural pronoun? Now, I'd say that's up to each of us to decide. However, this does touch on a gray area where it can become difficult to respect something that feels unnatural or out of place. Calling one person by a plural pronoun is grammatically incorrect and could lead to discomfort. The same applies to situations where someone wants to be called by a name like God, genius, or beautiful. These names may feel unnatural or out of place and could make others uncomfortable when using them. As I've always said, you can ask someone to address you in a certain way, even by a common, ordinary name, but if they refuse, there's not much you can do beyond responding assertively. You can't force them. For example, if someone calls me Robert instead of Ronald to bully me, I can express that I don't appreciate it and kindly ask them to stop, but that's about it. We can't organize our environment in such a way that it completely shields us from harm. We shouldn't always rely on or expect good behavior from others. And no matter how hard we try to make the world a better place, and in my opinion, we're not doing a great job at it, there will always be bad people. Respecting someone or their preferences is often a choice. So the question we could ask is the reason for not respecting someone's name or preferred pronouns understandable? For instance, refusing to use a plural pronoun for a single person can be understandable. Saying to one person, "Do they have a favorite book?" instead of, "Do you have a favorite book?" feels counterintuitive. Similarly, declining to use female pronouns for a man who hasn't demonstrated any female behavior, or who even has a history of harassing women, is understandable as well. Alright, if you've made it this far, please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. In that way I know you appreciate what I do and it motivates me to keep going. So thank you very much for listening and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye.